I met Duane and Gregg Allman in about 1965, maybe, and down in Mobile, and then they came to Tuscaloosa, where I was living, to play a fraternity party, and I told Greg about my Hammond organ and what it was all about. I said, "Man, you need to get one of these," and he said, "I want to see it." So they came over to my house, and my Hammond was sitting there in a Leslie speaker, and Greg saw that thing going around, and I hit him a couple of Jimmy Smith licks, and oh man, he just had a fit. He just said, "I got to get one of them," and it was probably a year at the most. Later, we wound up playing together in the same band, of course, what became the Hourglass, and that's the first time he had got to play a Hammond regularly.
And it worked out where Greg did get it.
And he did pretty good with it.
Hey y'all, this is Chris Hicks, and welcome to the Southern Rock Insider. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe and click the notification bell. It's time to rock Southern style. The Southern Rock Insider. Hello everybody, I'm Chris Hicks here with your Southern Rock Insider, and I'm down at Muscadine Studio in Macon, Georgia today with an old friend of mine, the great producer and musician Paul Hornsby. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Ain't it great to be in Macon?
Yes, it is.
And be at Muscadine.
And be at Muscadine. It sure is.
It's
great to be
here somewhere. Be at Muscadine.
Muscadine Studio. What a place here on Bineville Avenue. Paul's been here since 1982. Is that right?
It's the best I can remember.
1982. He's recorded tons of projects, albums, singles, jingles, lots of stuff through the years. And we're going to talk to Paul today about some of that and some other
Chris
things.
Hicks has even recorded here.
Sure have. I've cut most of my best hits were recorded right here in Muscadine Studio. Through the years, many, many tracks. Loose Change, and my band. Tucker even come in here and recorded some stuff. Well, what got you started in music? What got you interested?
I was interested in music probably before I was born. My daddy was an old-time fiddle player. And he was kind of a little semi-celebrity in his part of the country down there. They didn't have any nightclubs or anything, and so where he would play it, he'd get invited to play at house parties and square dances, and they had what was called cakewalks. It's kind of like musical chairs. You'd go around the circumference of the auditorium, and it had hopscotch squares sort of with numbers on them, and when the band would quit playing, you stopped on a certain number and you got a cake, depending on what number you stopped on, etc. So that was the kind of events he played at, and they never got paid anything. They would send a hat around, and those farmers, they might have a nickel or two, and if they got enough money to buy gas home, they done had a good gig. Mm-hmm. So my daddy never got with the program, never could understand how you could make money playing music. And truthfully, I've wondered a few times about myself, But so that's it. We had many debates over my future career in the music business. Mm-hmm. So that was the beginning. And then when I guess you'd say I was a kind of a slacker in school and after school and most any day now, but I was about in the third grade, and I'd sit on the back row of the schoolroom, and I'd sit back there and hope the teacher didn't call on me. And I hated school so bad, but there was this pretty little girl in the class. This was about the third grade, and every certain day of the week, so she would get to leave class, and I couldn't understand where she was going, and I'd have to sit there and do arithmetic and stuff. And finally I asked where she was going, and the teacher told me she was going to her piano lesson. So I thought, So somehow I conned my mother into getting an big old upright piano, which we still have. And she paid $75 for it. And back then, $75 was a chunk of money. And so I was all set to take piano lessons, because I was going to skip class. After about the second piano lesson I had, I thought, oh my God, whatever. I'd rather be doing arithmetic any day than this. And of course, I love music, but I'd never tried to play any. And here I am sitting at a piano, looking at a book with some dumbass songs that nobody wanted to hear, and I'd get her to play it first, and then I'd play it. And she didn't realize I had an ear, and I didn't know what an ear was except to hold up my glasses. And so I would play it like she, and then all of a sudden she caught on to me. And she was one of them that she kept a rule and she'd hit you on the fingers if you played anything that wasn't written on the page. So that was my introduction to music and piano lessons. And I had to do that for quite a while. And my mother had already invested $75 in me, and she let me know that I wasn't going to waste that $75. And so finally I got as big as she was, and I just said, I won't take it anymore. I won't take any more lessons. So a few years I quit. I didn't play any music. Then one day I picked up the old Gibson guitar. You may have seen it here in my studio, but big old Gibson. My daddy had brought it home, and he also had a shiny red Silvertone, almost brand new guitar. And this Gibson, this is an old guitar made in the 40s. And he says, my cousin gave me these guitars, and take them home, try them out, whichever one I wanted. He'd take $25. No, it was $15. He'd take $15 for either one of them. And he picks up that old Gibson and he strummed. He said, "Listen to that tone." And I said, "Yeah, but Daddy, that other one's red." And luckily, he knew more about guitar playing than I did, and he wound up buying what turns out to be a very rare Banner Gibson acoustic Southern Jumbo Gibson guitar. And so he taught me. I remember you could smell that hole in that guitar, the way it smelled. And I thought, that's the way music smelled. I thought music had a smell to it, you know. And it was the guitar, but I thought it was the music itself. And then finally, I played it while he taught me 2 or 3, and I was shy. Man, I wouldn't talk to a girl. And one day he had taught me a couple of chords on that guitar, and I sat down and I played them 2 chords, and there was a girl came over and talked to me. Mm-hmm. I thought, guitar, girl, hey, did I see a career coming here? And so anyway, then he finally, that Christmas, I think they bought me my own red Silvertone guitar. And so it's a pretty long story right in there, but that's the beginning of it. That was the seed of it. So I was a guitar player, and I just loved it. Just there was nothing like playing guitar. I lived it and breathed it and ate it, and guitar was the stuff. And I played guitar in bands for several years, and it wasn't until I saw the Animals on their first U.S. tour, and Alan Price had that little portable box organ, little red organ. I never seen anything like that. I thought, man, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I bet I could play that if I had it. And the band I was in, we were already playing the House of the Rising Sun. And that organ was very prominent in there, but we did a pretty good job of it. I thought, if I had that organ, I could play House of the Rising Sun. So I bought a Farfisa. I don't know if you remember those, but there weren't many Vox organs around. I bought it, got it on Monday, and I played my first gig with it that Friday. Played House of the Rising Sun, wouldn't you know. And that was the beginning of playing. I never did learn to play. When I was taking lessons, they wouldn't let me play anything like that, so I never learned anything. So that was probably the first thing I ever learned on a keyboard was House of the Rising Sun. And within 6 months, I'd gotten about all you could get out of Farfisa, and somehow I came in possession of a Jimmy Smith album. It's a long story, long way to get around this question.
That's all right.
I don't think you can tell it.
That's right.
And anyway, I discovered Jimmy Smith and Hammond organs, and I had to have one. And so I bought my first Hammond, and I'm getting into organ playing more and more, and I'm playing half guitar and half organ at this time. And I remember I got I met Duane and Gregg Allman in about 1965, maybe, and down in Mobile, and then they came to Tuscaloosa, where I was living, to play a fraternity party, and I told Greg about my Hammond organ and what it was all about. I said, "Man, you need to get one of these," and he said, "I want to see it." So they came over to my house, and my Hammond was sitting there in a Leslie speaker, and Greg saw that thing going around, and I hit him a couple of Jimmy Smith licks, and oh man, he just had a fit. He just said, "I got to get one of them," and it was probably a year at the most. Later, we wound up playing together in the same band, of course, what became the Hourglass, and that's the first time he had got to play a Hammond regularly.
And it worked out where Greg did get a
And he did pretty good with it.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much in a nutshell my music start. Get keyboard, but piano lessons, guitar, organ, what else?
Sounds like playing music and breaking the rules kind of come hand in hand with you early on.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's funny you were talking about the music, the way music smells. I know what you're talking about with old instruments, or even sometimes in old music stores, you can catch that aroma of
antique smell.
Yeah, antique smell of wood, or I'm not sure what it is, but maybe it is the music in there.
Yeah, I thought it was the music.
One time in New Brockton, Alabama, they had Paul Hornsby Day. It's been a few years ago now. Paul invited me to go with him over there, and we did a few functions. We sat in with the band at the park that afternoon, and they had a formal ceremony that night where they named a street after Paul in New Brockton. And the band, the Minutes, that Paul was in back in the day, contacted me secretly without Paul knowing about it, and we got together and rehearsed a song that they had worked up for him. And I know it was a surprise because on his face, they show up at the ceremony and they play the song for Paul, and a lot of admiration going on about it. But talk about the Minutes a little bit.
It was kind of like a "This Is Your Life" moment. That whole story there started out. Actually, I got inducted into the Alabama Music Hall of Fame. This was 2010, and then on the heels of that sort of kicked off a whole domino effect of things. Then that following May 1st, they had a Dothan, Alabama's down there, very close to New Brockton, and it's known as the Mural City, and they've preserved all those old warehouses, cotton warehouses and things, and they've got scenes painted in murals that depicts life and early life in that area, the Wiregrass areas they call it, and there's people hauling wagons and picking cotton, and then two or three. The Johnny Mac Brown is a cowboy, big famous cowboy star who's on a building, and then there's a couple of buildings that had local famous musicians, and I'd got word that they wanted to include me on a mural, on the side of the wall. So we started off that morning, and they called me ahead of time, wanted me to submit them some pictures, so they'd have something to go by to paint the pictures. So I sent them the latest pictures, and we went down that morning. We got there a little early, wanted to get there and get the feel of the place before I had to do some speechifying. And we drove by and looking for this place, and I couldn't see anything that looked like me. There was Ray Charles's picture and Hank Williams Sr. and all these people, and I didn't see Paul Hornsby anywhere. We must have made 10 trips by, and then suddenly something hit my eye. And it was a picture of me when I was about 22 years old, young Paul. I thought, oh, I remember that guy. And so that kind of kicked off bright and early that morning in Dothan with a mural. And that was just, already getting in the Hall of Fame was the biggest thing. Never would have dreamed that. And then I had a mural. Then I had to be over in New Brockton, my hometown, by noon that morning where they were having Paul Hornsby Day. So Chris Hicks came over and saved me, and I had not done any out front singing, and I'm not a lead singer. I played a time or two, but so Chris came and rescued me, and some young band from Albany came over, and so that was Paul Hornsby Day. Yeah. So there was a lot of bam, bam, bam all in one time.
I'm sure you know this as good as anybody. A lot of rich musical heritage in Alabama in general, but in that part of Alabama, it seems there's a lot of great musicians from that area.
My hometown, which is a spot in the road, not a very big spot even, one traffic light that worked sometimes, and Hank Williams' steel guitar player, Don Helms, from the same town, Spot Crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I were the only two known musicians from there. Yeah. That's what it's got going for it.
Well, I remember your mama was still alive, and I remember her sitting in the front row with the look on her face. She was mighty proud that day.
Well, I'm glad she lived to make it through there that day.
She was mighty proud. She should have been.
I had a band called the Minutes. We were on the road, and we were friends with the Almond Joys, and we were bumping into them everywhere. And so they were telling us how wonderful life on the road is. And so I'll never believe anything else anybody ever tells me again. But anyway, we chunked it all. We quit our day jobs and we signed up with their same booking agent out of Nashville. And so all of a sudden we were chasing the Almond Joys all over the Southeast and Midwest, playing a string of clubs and all. And in the early of 1967, Eddie Hinton, our front man, singer, guitar player, left the band and decided to go to Muscle Shoals to be a session player. Well, we were stuck there starving for a few weeks in Johnny Sandlin's parents' garage in North Alabama, Decatur, Alabama. And Duane and Gregg had the Almond Joys going on. So one day there in the middle of starvation, Duane called me and says, Hornsby, how would you like to have me and Gregg in your band? And I said, what? He said, well, we just had to fire a bass player, and Bill Cannell, our drummer's about to get drafted. He's joining the Navy. And we need a band. And so, I mean, how long did I have to think that over? And so within a day or two, they drove down from St. Louis, where their last gig was, and they showed up in Johnny Sandlin's parents' house, and we rehearsed for about a week, maybe 2 weeks, and we took what material we had and what they had. And of course, we had you know how bands are, you play a lot of the same material, and we had a lot of tunes in common and worked up a few new ones too. And first gig we played, they said, well, we can get a booking in St. Louis. Almond Joys always went over great there. So we struck out for St. Louis. And first gig we had a 2-week booking, Pepe's a Go-Go. And at that time, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band came through St. Louis on their first tour, promote their first album. And they ran into one of us at the airport, and they were invited to come by to hear us play. And so they popped in the club one night, and Bill McEwen was their manager, and he saw the band and just flipped out. And imagine going in and seeing the Allman Brothers band in a club the first time, what you'd feel like. And it wasn't far from that, you know. Mm-hmm. And he went down next door or someplace and found a payphone and called somebody at Liberty Records and said, I've just found the next Rolling Stones. Actually, what he'd found, the next Allman Brothers band, was a bit closer. So we had a meeting on Sunday. He stayed over, and he said, if you'll move to L.A., I'd like to manage you, and I'll get you a record deal. And so about 2 months later, we were in L.A., and he did, and we had a record deal. Probably 2 weeks after we were out, we had a record deal. So this is in the length of time it took the Minutes in September to go on the road. We broke up, joined up with the Almonds. We're in L.A., and then by June, we've got a record deal. That's a lot of stuff, but how many years does it take normally for that to happen? So that was the beginning of the Hourglass. And we wound up being out there, and I guess you'd say we were the very first, what we call Southern rock bands at that time. I mean, it wasn't called that, but I mean, we were playing that style of music. And on the West Coast, they were playing the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean and all this surf music was the big deal. And so, boy, we were out of place. We were as out of place as the Pope in a double bed. And so I like that. I've used that twice a day. The producer didn't know what to do and he recognized the soulfulness of Gregg's voice, but somehow he totally missed what Duane was all about. And Duane was really the highlight of the whole band. I mean, he was the stuff. Not taking anything away from Gregg, but So the producer decides he thinks that we should he wanted to cut Gregg like a soul singer and have him in the front another band. Sort of like Tommy James and the Shondells or something. And they wanted him to come out from behind the Hammond organ and hold a mic and walk out front and all this stuff. And the first gig we played, which was a showcase for the record guy, and they had a runway out front, and they'd convinced Gregg to take the mic, get up from behind the organ, and walk out and onto the runway. And I remember we were playing "A Change Is Gonna Come" by Sam Cooke. Gregg could sing that song into the dirt, but here he is. He's out there holding this mic, and he kind of at the side of his eye, he looks out and he sees us sitting way back there playing, and his knees got to shaking. I think maybe he went down on one knee, kind of used a little showmanship, and he couldn't hardly get up. His legs were shaking, and his voice cracked then. And he was scared. I've never seen anybody so scared. First gig in Hollywood, California. And he said, never again, never again. I'm an organ player, and I'll do my singing behind the organ player. No more of this Tom Jones stuff, And somehow we got signed anyway. So producers still tried to make a soul band out of it. And he kept referring to us as a Motown band. So anytime you could think of the closest thing would have been a future Allman Brothers. Imagine somebody trying to take them in that direction. So it didn't work at all. And we hung with it out there, and we did that album, did another album. We got slightly better, but it was less than a year's time, and we had 2 albums, and we hadn't had time to develop the right material, and it looked like it was going nowhere. And we came back east as a little promotional tour, and the band went into Muscle Shoals, into Fame Studio, and we cut some demos and took it back to play for them. We said, this is what we sound like. This is the way we want to be recorded. And they absolutely hated it. They thought it was the worst thing I'd ever heard. And so we just kind of look at each other and like, we're going nowhere fast. It's not going to work out. And just maybe 3 months later, we left LA, came back, and were so discouraged, the band broke up. That was it. That was it for the Hourglass.
Some record executives' big idea of forming the band he wanted to hear, I guess.
Yeah, he had no idea. He'd never heard the kind of music we were doing. He had nothing to draw upon. I guess he'd heard the blues. He probably never listened to any.
Well, you guys were pretty cutting edge. You might have been doing it for the first time.
Yeah, I don't think he ever heard any blues. He'd heard the Four Tops.
Mm-hmm. By the way, some stuff we're talking about today is in Paul's new book, Fix It in the Mix, and lots of other stories of his life and recording career and some other things, some secrets in there he might have told on you. So check it out. Paul Hornsby's Fix It in the Mix is available now. For years and years, ever so often, somebody would say, I'd sit around and tell a few stories over drinks, and you need to put that in a book. You need to write a book. Finally, one day, Michael Buffalo Smith called me, and Michael's got a whole book. He's got more books on Southern rock than anybody I know. And he called me and said, hey, Mercer University has approached me about writing a book on you. What do you think? I said, man, I don't know if I can remember enough stuff anymore, And I said, and my best stories, I don't know if I could tell it in a book. And anyway, with a little convincing, we got started on it. And it took us about 3 years. And then the pandemic hit, and that put us behind another year. And so we finally, it's out. It escaped. Well, it might be a good time for it to come out. Things are opening back up. And we're going to walk down memory lane and fix it in the mix.
At least I can get out and talk about it a little bit.
Some of the Hourglass recordings we've been talking about is being reissued right now on CD with some bonus tracks and things like that. So check that out if you haven't listened to it. The stuff from Fame Studios, that's B.B. King medley, that is, and some good tracks. I want to talk about Eddie Hinton for a minute.
It's like a lot of times is the case. You don't think that much about somebody until they're gone. But Eddie was just a genius, and he was a little nuts. And that kind of, sometimes that helps. Some of the most talented people I've ever known have been crazy as hell. And Eddie, I could just keep naming little crazy things he'd do. When we were riding to and from gigs, the band, we wouldn't carpool with Eddie. We wouldn't ride in the same car with Eddie. He'd scream all the way. We'd be driving from Tuscaloosa to say Auburn to do a gig. He'd scream every mile of the way. And there's nothing quite like sitting in the car with somebody screaming. He said, man, he's getting his voice in shape for the night. He wanted to get it tore up. And there, when he passed away, his voice was just shattered, and it sounded great. It had that busted speaker sound.
Oh, it had an edge. I was a late bloomer on Eddie. And I've heard you talk about him through the years, but only a few years ago did I kind of discover him for myself. And I was like, wow, the powerhouse this guy had, the Shout Bama Lama that Willie did later on. Great cut of that. Let's talk about Chuck Lavelle. Your early ties with him, how you guys met.
The Hourglass broke up like June of 1968, late June. And I moved back to Tuscaloosa. Tuscaloosa was always a great town. I lived there several years before I was playing with the Minutes and going on the road, etc. and stuff. So when we broke up, I naturally moved back to Tuscaloosa. And there wasn't a whole lot going on in New Brockton now, under the traffic light. So there was a club in town called the Shelf Lounge, and there was a band kind of loosely held together called South Count. And most of the time they didn't even use a name. They just, every weekend, the band members would vary somewhat. One guy would be missing the next weekend, somebody else knew would be in there. So I tried to get in there and organize the group some way where you had a more cohesive group, where that way you could even rehearse. They were mostly jamming and stuff. I wanted something where we could work up some material and have some, and maybe be a little commercial success. Who knew? And I love the format the Hourglass had. We had Duane and me doing guitar, and I was also playing keyboard. Well, Greg was playing keyboards, and occasionally he'd play rhythm guitar on some stuff, and we had bass and drum. So it was a 5-piece band. So I love that, having two keyboards side by side. So I kind of use that as a template. So there was a young piano player in Tuscaloosa, several years younger than me, Chuck Lavelle. This was the summertime of 1968. He was between semesters in school, and he was getting ready to go in 12th grade. And so he had a Wurlitzer electric piano, and I had my Hammond. And so there we were. I thought, wow, that's great. And he plays good. I'm like, he's a young cat. He's just a teenager, but man, this guy, he's probably going to go somewhere. And we had a pretty good band there. And one of the bass players was Charlie Hayward, who turned out being the bass player for Charlie Daniels for the last 45 years, 46 years. And another drummer that stayed with us longer than anybody else was Bill Stewart, who later came on over, was a Capricorn drummer. Played with Gregg Allman and played on tons of Capricorn acts. And so we kept that band South Count together for about 8 months. And we were getting gigs, playing fraternity parties, and probably the best band in Tuscaloosa at that time. Tuscaloosa was a great town for musicians. It's like Macon. I mean, you could go to Tuscaloosa and find your players. You're looking for somebody. And so while in the middle of that 9-month period right in there, Duane was in muscle shows, cutting sessions, and he called me one day and said, hey, Hornsby said, man, he said, I'm going to cut some demos. Would you come up and play on some demos with me? He said, Atlantic has heard some guitar work I've done, and they want me to cut some demos to see if I can sing, just see what I've got. And I'm rambling a little bit, but you can't. That's the way you have to tell these stories. So I went up, and that was in the spring of '69, and it was an interesting trip. I was up there about 2 days, I had 3 pretty good job offers those 2 days I was there. First one, Rick Hall offered me a job playing in Fame Studio as a session piano player. He liked what I was doing on Duane stuff. And then I met Phil Walden. He came to town, and he was in the middle of signing Duane to a contract, and he wanted to put a band together around Duane. He loved what he was hearing that Duane was doing. And he asked Johnny Sandlin and I, would we get back with Duane? And so essentially he wanted to put the Hourglass back together. But, after what we just gone through, and I thought, oh man, and I'd already moved here back to Tuscaloosa, and I had a good band, Chuck Lavelle, Charlie Hayward, you can imagine, all these guys. And I said, no, I don't think I want to go back on the road. I don't think I want to do it. And so was Johnny. And he said, no, I want to do studio work, maybe. And Phil looked at me and said, well, if you want playing this band with Duane, I'm building a studio in Macon, and I want to put together a rhythm section. Would you consider coming and being a piano player? And I said, Macon, where's that? And Otis Redding's from here, and Little Richard's from here, but I'm building a studio and so on. And anyway, over the next couple of months, he'd call every day. He'd sweeten the deal a little bit. And so in just about 3 months, I found myself living in Macon, and I turned down Rick Hall's gig and turned down Duane's band, and I took the job at Capricorn.
Thanks for watching this episode of Southern Rock Insider. Please hit subscribe and click the notification bell so you won't miss a single episode. If you have any questions or comments and suggestions for future episodes, please respond below, or you can email us at southernrockinsider@gmail.com. This is your Southern Rock Insider, Chris Hicks, and thanks again for watching.
The Southern Rock Insider.